Hello and welcome to the NB Media Co-op. I'm David Gordon-Koch, speaking today with Janelle LeBlanc, provincial coordinator of the NB Common Front for Social Justice. Thanks for speaking to us today, Janelle.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
So we're recording this interview on Monday, March 25th, almost a week after the Higgs government issued the provincial budget for the coming year. Finance Minister Ernie Steeves is projecting another surplus, this time $41 million. Although actual surpluses have exceeded projections for the past several years. And of course, the government calls their approach fiscally responsible, but some critics have said that the Higgs government is getting these surpluses off of the backs of poor people by failing to invest enough in healthcare and so on and so forth. Janelle, you were in Fredericton for the budget lockup. Can you describe the experience and your reaction to the new budget?
I mean, it's always a great experience because we get to speak to many people, our community partners, labor partners. Um, New Brunswick is facing many crises right now. We have an affordability crisis. We have an affordable housing crisis. Homelessness rates are on the rise. We have low and stagnant wages and fixed incomes. There's a huge waiting list for subsidized housing. So our expectations were quite high because of all these crises. And, we in the budget lock-in, when we had access to all the documents, the first thing we did is we looked at the social assistance budget, and there was nothing new in there. What we found was the $200 monthly supplement. We found the indexation of the social assistance rates, and then the basic rates, and that's it. So we were kind of disappointed because we expected some extra investments in the social assistance program. We know that the social assistance rates are the lowest in Canada. The $200 monthly supplement is deemed permanent, but there's no legislation to that effect. So we have no idea if this government or a future government could abolish it, could remove it. So yeah, we left disappointed. It was a lackluster budget, especially in this election year. So yeah, and we're not the only ones who are disappointed, of course. Many community groups are they're iffy on this budget.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to Ernie Steeves, the finance minister, reading from his budget speech.
We've increased social assistance rates. We've helped clients keep more money while transitioning to work, and we reduced harmful clawbacks. Moreover, we have indexed benefits to inflation. Budget 24-25 reaffirms our commitment to indexing social assistance rates to inflation. That means that social assistance rates will increase by 3.6% under this transitional assistance program and the extended benefits program, resulting in an additional $7.3 million that will benefit approximately 26,000 unique households in New Brunswick. In addition, a new $200 per month household supplement for social assistance recipients and youth engagement services recipients have been created, resulting in $51 million being provided to over 33,000 residents, including over 10,000 children. Hear, hear.
So that was Finance Minister Ernie Steeves reading from his budget speech. And he says the budget, quote, reaffirms our commitment to indexing social assistance rates to inflation. So in other words, what can we say about this 3.6% increase to social assistance?
I mean, that's something that the Common Front was asking for years, and it's, I believe, the second or third year that they're indexing the social assistance rates based on the consumer price index of the previous year. So that's a good thing. What we heard in the budget lock-in and what we read in the budget document is that the increased social assistance rates, and that's false. The basic rates have not increased in many, many, many years. The rates are indexed to inflation, and they stay the same from year to year in terms of purchasing power. And we also don't count the supplement as a rate increase because, like I said, There's no legislation that's been introduced, so it could be removed at any time. And for those listening, if you don't know, the social assistance rates are either 637 or 886. 637 is if you're deemed employable, and 886 is if you have a disability. Now, if you add the supplement, $200, many people are still going to be living with less than $1,000 per month. And those with a disability, it's a bit over $1,000. That's not a lot considering the cost of living today. And the indexation, 3.6%, it's an extra maybe $20, $30 a month. That doesn't really make a huge difference. And to go back to the supplement, a lot of social assistance recipients, of course, they're pleased with an extra $200 because it's something at least. But we're already seeing that landlords are increasing rents by $200. So already there, social assistance recipients are, giving that money to landlords. Some social assistance recipients are also getting like a cell phone contract for maybe 2 years. But what if this supplement is removed in 6 months, in a year? They don't have the money or the income to pay for either the extra $200 that goes for rent or for a cell phone. So, we have to be careful how we talk about social assistance rates. We'd like to see the rates increase to the poverty line, but a first step would be to add that $200 supplement to the basic rates, because that means it would be legislated, and that would be like a forever thing. So yeah, the minister has to clarify that it's not really an increase, because we've been hearing that quite a bit since the budget was tabled. So we need to be careful.
So as you say, the provincial government is calling this an increase in its statements to the media and in the Legislative Assembly. The Common Front has pointed out this reflects the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So inflation, which, as everyone is aware, there's a cost of living crisis going on with the price of food, housing, NB power rates are going up soon. And you mentioned the current rates that are in place. The think tank Maytree recently reported that New Brunswick social assistance rates are the lowest in Canada, with a single person deemed employable, as you say, receiving $637 per month, or for a single person with a disability, $886 per month. And then there's this $200 per month household supplement that you also discussed, that the Common Front wants to see made permanent through legislation or incorporated into the actual, so an actual bump in the kind of relative value of social assistance, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, with the cost of living today, you can't live on less than $1,000 per month. It's kind of impossible. Try to find an apartment that is, clean and not moldy and in a basement, and pay for groceries, pay for electricity, pay for, let's say, internet and a phone, clothing, medication. You can't. It's basically impossible. One thing that the government did change is the household income policy that determines who's eligible to receive social assistance. And they changed a few years ago that 2 roommates can live together now and each get a check for social assistance. And that's a very good thing. We do want the household income policy to be abolished, because couples cannot live together and both get a check. So that discriminates people with a disability whose spouse may be working and they can get a social assistance check from the provincial government.
So let me make sure I've got this straight. So roommates can now share a home together and both receive a check, whereas they could not do that before this budget. Is that right?
They changed that a few years ago. I think it was in 2022 that they changed the household income policy, but for roommates only.
So you want to see this extended to spouses as well?
Yeah, we just want the household income policy to be abolished, and each person who sends a form to be approved for social assistance would be just looked at like as a single person, not a household.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so, you talked about it, the cost of living. Can you kind of elaborate on how, the current social assistance rates actually compare to, I guess, what most people would call a basic standard of living? Or in other words, how difficult is it for people, for members of the Common Front, for people that you see in Moncton, struggling to get by day by day?
Oh yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Maitri report. So the last Maitri report was in 2022. It was released in 2023, but it's the data from 2022. And just an example, the income for a single person deemed employable was $8,031 for 2022, for like a year. And a single person with disabilities, it was 10,884. So if you look at just rent, let's say in Moncton, I know of a person who lives in a rooming house who pays $450 for rent and gets a social assistance check of 637. So that's more than 30% on rent, which is a lot. And then you add the groceries. So a lot of people go to food banks because they can't afford to buy groceries anymore. As you know, anyone knows, you go to the grocery store, you buy a couple fruits, and it costs you like $20 just for like 2 apples and a banana. So try to buy meat and milk and eggs and fruit and maybe some snacks just because we want to live and have a little bit of fun. It's basically impossible. And you mentioned earlier the NB power rates are going up 13% on April 1st. That also affects people who have to pay electricity rates if they're not included in their rent. And if you live in a substandard housing or apartment that, the windows are half shut, half open because they're not, what do you call that?
Insulated?
Insulated properly, well, you're going to pay more in heat or electricity even. So it's people living on social assistance are living in extreme poverty. That was also included in the Maitri report. And it's the annual income is not even close to the poverty line. We're talking about $10,000, a $10,000 difference. No, even more than that, $15,000 difference between what they get annually and what the poverty line is. Because the poverty line did increase in the last couple of years because cost of living is so expensive. So it's inhumane what they're going through, and it is a social program that's been underfunded for many years, not just by this current government but previous governments. So we can't, it hurts my heart that we have people who are struggling to make ends meet and they're so close to losing their dwelling, losing their apartments, and they'll end up on the street. And we already have a homelessness crisis in New Brunswick. I'm going to call it that because the rates are increasing in the last couple of years. So we're talking about humans here. They're not just, robots. So yeah.
Yeah, point well taken. And you mentioned grocery prices. I wanted to go to another clip, footage from a recent protest in Fredericton, where members of the group NB Acorn were protesting against high grocery prices, which they call the grocery gouge. There were similar events in Moncton and in other locations. Let's go to that footage.
Today is the National Day of Action for Acorn Canada, where many cities across Canada are taking part in stopping grocery gouging. We've seen record profits for the CEOs of just 2 major companies, while people are really struggling to eat and to afford groceries. So Acorn Canada are demanding that grocery gouging stops.
So with this event today, we have 3 actions that we would like to take direct action towards these grocery companies for. The first being taxing the rich to stop price gouging. Yay! That has been going on for the past decade, if not longer, in record profits that these companies are making. The second being capping the price on essential food items, as they have done in many different places that help people in their local economies, that keep people alive to this day. And the third one is to stop the consolidation of grocery chains. Otherwise, we're all going to be out of food at some point. We need to have these actions put together so then we can go forward and live our lives the way we're meant to live them.
So, again, members of NB Acorn in Fredericton last month calling in part for the feds to tax record profits from corporate grocery chains. Of course, a typical response to this kind of demand from fiscally conservative quarters is that there's sort of this invisible hand of the market, which is the best thing for an economy, and the government basically should not interfere in sort of forces of supply and demand. How would you respond to that, Janelle?
I mean, food is a basic necessity. The big grocers in Canada, they made millions of dollars in profits last year and the previous year. There's no need to increase the grocery prices as much as they did. And actually, the food inflation was above the inflation rates. There's no need for that. When you have people who are working 40 hours a week who can't afford groceries, it's ridiculous. Because we hear a lot, well, just go find a job, you'll be fine. Well, that's not the case anymore. We have people working and they're going to food banks because they can't afford groceries. Food banks have been saying this. We've seen an increase in minimum wage and low wage workers, people who don't earn a living wage in New Brunswick. They go to food banks because they can't go to Sobeys, let's say. And in many communities, we don't have access to groceries that are affordable. The only option we have is, let's say, Sobeys. So they can price gouge as much as they want. People are going to go because that's the only option. If we look at food insecurity rates in New Brunswick, there's a research team at the University of Toronto. It's called Proof, and they look at food insecurity rates across Canada. And in 2022, 22.7% of the population in New Brunswick, or 174,000 people, lived in insecure households in New Brunswick, food insecure households. That's an increase from 2021. And I'm going to guess it's going to go up again this year. There's also a report from Food Banks Canada that was released last year that 2 in 5 New Brunswickers are struggling to access fresh and affordable food. 40% of people in the province are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and that affects what they can afford for food. So this is not just a provincial issue, this is a federal issue as well. But the one thing that the province can do is, number one, like we've been saying, the Common Front for decades now, is to increase social assistance rates, but also increase the minimum wage to a living wage, because people can't afford to live. They can't afford to buy basic necessities. And one last thing that I can add, I remember when I was in school in the 90s that the federal government, and even additionally provincial government, they wanted to eliminate poverty by the year 2000. And it's 2023 and the poverty rates are increasing. So they really missed a mark there.
So you mentioned a couple things there, a couple of concrete things that the province could do, which is on one hand, raise the rates, social assistance rates substantially. How much would social assistance rates need to increase?
So the market basket measure 2022 that determines the poverty. It's the official poverty line in Canada. They determine that the poverty line in New Brunswick in Fredericton is about 25,000 a year. And then you have Moncton, St. John, and then smaller cities, communities, and then rural areas. It's all within that range, like $24,000 to $25,000. In 2020, that was about 21,000 to 22,000. So we've seen an increase. We would like to see the social assistance rates to be increased to the poverty line. So 25,000. I mean, people find us a bit radical, but social assistance recipients have been living in extreme poverty for decades now. They deserve a living wage as well. And there's a lot of misconceptions about social assistance recipients who actually get social assistance and for what reason. It's a last resort. Today, people who go on social assistance, they don't wake up one morning and they say, you know what, I want to be on social assistance. I only want to get $637 a month. I can live on that. Like that's not how people think. So that would be our ultimate demand. Obviously, if they added the supplement to the basic rates, that would be a great step. If they increase by 500, that would be another step. But our ultimate demand is to go to the poverty line.
And the other major policy change that you mentioned was minimum wage, which will be going up to above $15 for the first time ever on April 1st. After a lot of campaigning, people have been campaigning for years for a $15 minimum wage. I think at least 10 years, as far as I can remember. Of course, inflation has gone up considerably since then, and the St. John Human Development Council has estimated that in cities, at least in New Brunswick, a living wage would be around $20. They do a different calculation for each of the main urban areas in New Brunswick, but it tends to be in the 20 to I think about $21 or $22 per hour range. So these are the kinds of changes that the Common Front has been calling for. Are there other policies, speaking of the province in particular, that in your view are necessary to lift people out of poverty?
Yeah, for sure. So just to go back to the minimum wage, that's another thing the government has been saying, oh, we've increased the minimum wage. They've increased, there's 1 year they added $1 and I think $2 to the minimum wage because it was very low, the lowest in Canada.
Yes.
Since 2018, the minimum wage has been indexed annually on April 1st based on the consumer price index of the previous years, same as social assistance rates. So again, it's not really an increase, it's indexation. And this has been going on since 2018, the previous government. So it's going to be $15.30 on April 1st. Like you said, that was our demand 10 years ago. We wanted $15 an hour 10 years ago. So the current minimum wage is not a living wage. The minimum wage on April 1st is not a living wage. And the new minimum wage is going to be one of the lowest in Canada. So we definitely want to see the minimum wage increase to at least $20 an hour. Another thing that the government can do is add 10 employer paid sick days to the Employment Standards Act, because currently we have no paid sick days in the Act. And there is a lot of people who go to work sick because they can't afford to take time off. And that includes parents as well. If their children are sick, they stay home without pay if they don't have access to paid sick days. So that's another way for the government to help with affordability. And also it is a public health demand, because we would like for people to stay home when they're sick and not spread illnesses and viruses and COVID and the rest of the illnesses that we hear about. So 10 employer paid sick days, we'd like to see that added to the Employment Standards Act. There was a public consultation last fall. We're waiting to hear back from the Law Amendments Committee to see what they're going to propose to the legislature. We are really hoping to see paid sick days added to the act this year.
Okay, and we're almost out of time, but I think that we should talk about housing a little bit more. Of course, this is one of the really big issues that a lot of people are facing right now. On housing, CBC journalist Jacques Poitras reported last week that the government also repeated a previous commitment first made in October 2022 to spend $102 million building or upgrading 380 public housing units. Finance Minister Ernie Steves said work on nearly half of those units will start this year, indicating little to no work has been done in the 17 months since the initial announcement, CBC reports. So, you deal with people, you work with people through the Common Front for Social Justice who live in NB housing, and we've heard a lot about some of the substandard conditions that these places are in, lacking repairs, and just kind of the long wait lists in general, which have been growing amid this housing crisis, the wait list for social housing. So just your comment on the housing situation in New Brunswick, Janelle.
I mean, the first thing that the province can do is add a permanent rent cap. There was a temporary temporary rent cap in 2022. It was removed at the end of that year, December 2022. That's the first thing that will help renters across the province, a permanent rent cap. And it's something that our community housing partners have been asking for years. The other thing that you just mentioned is the social housing, subsidized housing waitlist has doubled in the last 4 years, I believe. It's over 11,000 people on the wait list right now. There's a lot to do when it comes to housing. It's really time for the government to be in action right now. It's one thing they write things on paper and they say we're going to build X number of social housing units for the first time in 40 years. Okay, well, now do it. It's on paper, now it needs to be done. They also need to fix the units that already exist. Through our partners and even from our members, we hear they live in moldy apartments in NB housing. That doesn't make any sense. Fix them. Yeah, there's a lot. It's not one of our portfolios, the Common Front, but we obviously have to talk about housing because everybody lives, well, not everybody, but a lot of people live in an apartment or a house that could be improved. But the first thing is rent cap, increasing social housing units, fixing the social housing units, and to not just to announce commitments, but to also be in action, to actually do it. And one last thing I'll say, in the budget, the government said, oh, we've increased our investments in housing. A lot of that money came from the federal government, just to say. So it's not just a provincial investment. A lot of it came from the federal.
Okay, well, Janelle, thanks for speaking to the NB Media Co-op today. I've been speaking with Janelle LeBlanc, Provincial Coordinator of the NB Common Front for Social Justice. Thanks again, Janelle.
Oh, thank you.